Our economy is already suffering as a result of these tariffs. Anybody who thinks the tariff war has somehow or another benefited us is, on a very bad set of drugs. The truth is that it's harmed us already. This is going to make matters much worse. But let's be frank. He needs to understand something that I guess is not widely understood in Washington. Ursula von der Leyen is the captain of the Titanic. The EU is finished as an organization. So is NATO, for that matter. But the EU is probably going to go under first. It's about as popular as the plague. It was supposed to be an institution that would facilitate trade and cross-border travel and so forth, and it became effectively an unelected dictatorship in which decisions would be made on how everyone in Europe would live in a uniform manner and behave in a uniform manner. What have we seen? We've seen lots of EU members that said, listen, we don't want millions of people from the Middle East and North Africa and Central Africa pouring into our countries. No, thank you very much. Number two, there are EU agreements already in place with China and Russia, and most members want to see those honored. I mean, the world is waking up to something, and we have not wakened up to it yet, that we are actually living on a much smaller planet than we originally thought. In other words, everybody really desperately needs and wants to do business with each other. The world is not really organized into hostile camps, armed to the teeth, ready to go to war. And I think the Europeans collectively are beginning to figure that out. And as a result, the globalist leaders who have pinned all of their hopes on this war with Russia as a way to, quote unquote, not only break Russia, but break Europe as well and drive everyone into this new globalist utopia. Places without borders, governments with overweening power over its populations. All of this is failing badly. So what you get is a return to hostility. Look at Hungary, look at Slovakia, Croatia, even little Slovenia. Everybody's looking at this and saying, this is not really what we want. The Austrians certainly don't want it. The president of Finland was interviewed recently, and he got as close to renouncing this dumb decision of joining NATO as I think he could at this point. But he raised the issue, said, perhaps what we've done isn't really sensible. Maybe it wasn't necessary. This is happening right now. Von der Leyen has no power whatsoever. She's increasingly a figurehead. Paris, London, and Berlin are the only ones really listening carefully to von der Leyen. The Dutch, the Norwegians aren't in it, but the Dutch are there, but the Dutch shrink to almost total insignificance in the context of this whole strategic development. We seem to want to maintain this artificial construct called the Cold War in new form. It's a dead end. It's not going to work. And I think the Europeans, who are now approaching a depression, frankly, total destruction in industrial and scientific terms, are simply going to wake up, put new people into power. They're coming. It doesn't matter how hard Merz tries to keep the alternative for Germany out of power. It doesn't make any difference. They're going to come to power. And when they come to power, they're going to reverse all of this. And the first place they're going to go is Moscow. They're going to have a meeting right away. And they're going to throw out all this nonsense. And you're going to see the Germans march out of NATO at high speed. And remember that one of the arguments for all of this nonsense was we have to keep the Germans in NATO. That's part of the rationale for hostility to Russia, because that means Germans and Russians won't cooperate. And if Germans and Russians don't cooperate, we can live with the status quo in Washington in perpetuity. Everyone is vassalized in subordination to us. All of this is failing. It's all going to collapse. This has always been the issue. The real question, I think it was Anatol Lieven who raised the issue. He said, this will be decided by the people who are willing to fight. In other words, the Ukraine war. He said, now the Ukrainians are willing to fight, but what about everybody else in NATO? And that answer was, well, not so much. And the one nation that sent forces over there and swore allegiance to the Ukrainian state and died in great numbers for the Ukrainian state were the Poles. And now the Poles at least have sobered up to the extent that the new president says there will be no more Polish soldiers in Ukraine. Well, that's a good thing. But in the final analysis, your point is accurate. Nobody's interested in dying in Ukraine. People in France or Germany or Austria or any of these other countries, have no interest in marching 1,000 miles east in order to come to grips with the Russian army. I mean, what a dumb idea. That's the biggest mistake you could possibly make. So, at this stage, it's shadow boxing. There's nothing serious about it. That means that it's up to President Putin, his inner circle, to make the decision. And I think we're seeing the beginning of that with this punishing strike. I think they're going to go after all of the targets of command and control, which means the people who are in charge over in Ukraine. And I think they're going to start moving further west. Now, will they go all the way up to the river and stop? I don't know. But if you talk in terms of creating neutral zones and occupied zones, the Russians will have to go through because they won't accept that. That's sort of like saying, well, we just fought a war in Mexico, and northern Mexico is going to be a neutral zone. No one is there, and it'll have its own independent government. Then central Mexico, well, that's going to be something else. We're not really sure what it is yet, but it could be, have the presence of foreign forces in it. I mean, it's crazy. We would never accept that. Why would the Russians accept it? So we need to be honest, but we don't want to be honest, because to be honest means the premise for the war itself was always stupid. It was never correct. It was never necessary. We created this mess, and I'm serious. It's Washington, because you pull us out of this equation, it's over. And President Trump should understand that, but he is doing the opposite of what I thought he would do. He's doubling down on the policies of his predecessor. He's making a confrontation with Russia over Eastern Europe, over Eastern Ukraine, more likely, not less likely. And we all know another war is beginning to take shape in the Middle East. That's inevitable. Does he really think he's going to get any cooperation out of Moscow or Beijing or anybody else in a war between Israel and Iran? No, he's not. This is the sort of failure to think on multiple levels. No one looks at the implications. No one has done, as we used to say in the Army, branch and sequels for an operation. None of that has happened. And unfortunately, that's not something that President Trump is inclined to do. He's very resistant to the kind of study and preparation that would go with a meaningful summit. Prosperity is the foundation for defense. That's what you were watching. That is something that Eisenhower understood. Prosperity is key to defense. Without effective economic strength, development, and the prosperity that flows from it, your society fails, and more important, your military has no chance of success. That was the great lesson that he took from the Second World War. We've thrown that overboard. We focus exclusively on threats, backing those threats quickly with not just the threat of sanctions, but also the use of military power. Why would you have a summit with President Putin at Elmensdorf Air Force Base in Alaska? You welcome him, and what do you have? A raid all around you. All of these combat aircraft. What do you have above you? An overflight by a B-2. What's the point here? Is that something that you would expect at such a meeting? If you're trying to form, develop, foster a positive relationship in pursuit of prosperity and peace, is that what you do? Highlight your military capability and power? It would have made more sense had he a guard from the old guard and the Marines or something standing there in full dress uniform with a band. That would have made sense, and had both the Russian and U.S. national anthems played. That's what you should have done. That's not what we did. We did the opposite. So again, Trump is all about threats and bullying, and he's not going to accept anything that doesn't make him look good. He's going to reject any solution that does not place him at the center as the one who is in charge and is responsible for everything. It's a catastrophe. That's not what this is about. He's forgotten that he's the president of the United States and is leading the American people. The American people have no interest in going to war. The few that want to cheer bombings from the sidelines need to be ignored. They don't know what the hell they're talking about. They've never been to war. They'll never go. They are a danger to our society because of the cavalier way in which they address this issue of war. So I don't know what you can do at this stage. Obviously, we have to hope for the best, but I think Besant is on a fool's errand. The Europeans will desert this. Everyone will desert it because everyone wants to trade. Now, hopefully you can trade on a basis that is mutually beneficial. That's what we should be focused on. That can be achieved. But no one is interested in going to war, least of all the Russians, the Chinese, the Indians. It's all nonsense.